Hello there. Welcome to Sad History for Sleep. Tonight, we drift back in time through the soft veil of centuries to explore a name you know, but a truth you may never have been told. The story of Christopher Columbus has long been told as one of discovery, bravery, and triumph. But beneath the polished plaques and parades is a quieter, darker truth, one whispered by the wind that still moves across forgotten islands. So, find a comfortable place to rest, let your body become still, and let your mind sail gently into history's hidden tide. If you enjoy journeys like this, do consider subscribing to the channel, and when you wake, let us know where and what time you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Now, close your eyes if you like, and imagine the smell of salt air, the sound of weaving looms, the faint creak of ships moored in distant ports. It's time to begin. The year is somewhere around 1451, and the air in Genoa, a bustling coastal city in northern Italy, is thick with the scent of brine and dyed cloth. Cobblestones shine from the morning mist, merchant carts rumble gently past shuttered homes, and linen banners sway from stone balconies above narrow streets. You are a child here, just waking, perhaps, to the distant clatter of footsteps and the whistle of a stevedore calling out to the port. This city, Genoa, is alive with voices from the sea, Portuguese, Arabic, Catalan, even languages from lands further east than you've ever seen on a map. Genoa trades in spices, silks, and dreams. In a modest house, stitched into the city's crowded heart, a boy named Cristoforo Colombo is born to a family of wool weavers. His father, Domenico, is a man of simple skill. His mother, Susanna, tends to her children with the quiet, persistent rhythm of the time, mending cloth, boiling stew, watching the skies for weather. Their home smells faintly of lanolin and olive oil. The walls are bare but swept, the ceiling low and wooden beamed. There is no luxury here. Just hands at work and hope stretched thin like the wool they weave. You too might have been born here, under these same low ceilings, where the only maps are rumours, and the only tales of the wider world come from sailors with salt in their hair. Cristoforo listens, he watches, he learns. By the age of 10, the sea has already taken hold of his imagination. He walks often to the docks, slipping away from the loom, following the scent of pine tar and fish oil, tracing the outlines of ships in the harbour with his eyes. You can almost hear it now, the low hum of voices unloading cargo, the groaning of wood, the flap of sails resting like wings folded against a roost. Cristoforo will not be a weaver. He studies what he can, not in schools, those are reserved for sons of noblemen, but from the conversations of sailors, the gossip of merchants, the worn parchments traded in back rooms where faded Latin hints at riches just beyond the map's edge. He reads of Marco Polo's journeys and of lands rich with cinnamon, gold and silk, Asia, Cathay, Cipangu, places not truly understood but imagined in vivid colour. And above all, he reads of water, of straits, currents, tides, stars. Imagine yourself there beside him, in a candlelit room smelling of smoke and sheep's parchment, where maps are hand-drawn and the world is still full of blanks. He grows taller. The loom fades from his hands. At the age of 14, perhaps 15, he sets out to sea, beginning with short merchant voyages along the Ligurian coast. The Mediterranean becomes his classroom. He learns to tie knots in the dark, to read the clouds, to feel the mood of the waves. He sees cities wrapped in Crusader history, hears prayers chanted in languages foreign to his ears. In Lisbon, he finds sailors who have sailed around the Horn of Africa. In Madeira, he learns of the wind patterns that can carry a man westward, and not back again. But Columbus, young as he is, does not fear the unknown. He is intoxicated by it. Back in Genoa, his family hears little. Letters are rare, but they whisper of his ambition. A young man now, tan from the sun, hard-eyed, determined, and with a gaze fixed not on the loom, but on the edge of the world. Years pass. He marries a Portuguese noblewoman and gains access to maps that only noble captains have seen. From these, a dream begins to harden into a plan to reach Asia by sailing west, across what many still believe to be a limitless ocean. Others mock him. Most do not listen. Some consider him mad. But Columbus is not deterred. He is no longer just a sailor. He's a man possessed by vision, ambition, and something darker. He believes it is his destiny, not just to discover, but to conquer. He begins to approach the courts of Europe. Genoa will not fund him, nor will Portugal. He goes to Spain, waits, pleads, waits again. The court of Ferdinand and Isabella, fresh from their conquest of Granada and eager for new glories, listens. And one day, after years of petitioning, they say yes. But not out of trust, not out of science. They fund him for gold and for souls, to expand Christendom and perhaps their empire. The boy from Genoa has become a man with ships, with maps, and with power. He prepares to set sail, and the world will never be the same. Before sails cut the Atlantic horizon, before Spanish flags were planted on foreign sand, before the first whispered greetings between strangers across oceans, there was a world already old, already vast, already full, and tonight you'll wander through it. Imagine you awaken in the Valley of Mexico under a sky wide and crisp painted in morning gold. You're not a European settler, not a visitor, but a native of this land, a member of a civilization that builds cities from stone and starlight. In the heart of the city rises Tenochtitlan, home of the Aztecs, larger than almost any city in Europe at the time, clean, organized, bustling, a network of canals and causeways threading through temples and marketplaces. Water lilies drift on still lakes, bright feathers flutter in the breeze, and beneath it all the steady rhythm of life continues. Merchants sell cacao, obsidian, jade, and maize. Children run across neatly swept plazas. Priests watch the movement of stars. These are not primitive people. These are mathematicians, engineers, astronomers, poets. Farther south, high in the green-carved Andes, the Inca Empire winds like a living serpent through the mountains. Roads stretch for thousands of miles, more than in all of Spain. Suspension bridges of braided grass sway above canyons. Llamas carry goods. Runners pass messages carved into knotted cords called quipu. Their empire is a marvel of centralized planning, where food is stored in mountain silos, where no one starves in winter. Gold glints in ceremonial masks, not as wealth, but as sacred sunlight. The Inca do not know the wheel, but they know how to build cities that cling to cliffs with impossible grace. And in the dense forests of the northeast, the Henna Confederacy, sometimes called the Iroquois, have created a system of governance so sophisticated that it will later inspire the framers of the US Constitution. They farm the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, while building longhouses that breathe with generations of families. Disputes are settled through councils, not kings. Women hold power over land, crops, and life. Farther north, the Mississippian culture thrives, near what is now called Cahokia, a city of mounds, some taller than the pyramids of Giza. Here, in what most modern maps call the middle of nowhere, tens of thousands gather. They trade shells from the Gulf, copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from the Rockies. Ceremonies light the night sky. Drums echo into the trees. The rivers carry canoes like veins through the land, and in the Caribbean, on the soft breezes of the Lesser Antilles, live the Taíno people. They do not build empires, but they cultivate harmony. Their villages are circular, their hammocks gentle, their laughter frequent. They live close to the land, fishing and farming cassava, breathing in the salt and coconut-scented air. They are the people Columbus will one day first encounter, generous, unarmed, and unready. Across the Atlantic, in Europe, the scene is very different. There, the year is 1491, and the smell of smoke clings to the damp stones of Castile. War has just ended. The long campaign to drive Muslims from Spain, known as the Reconquista, concludes with blood and banners in Granada. Queen Isabella walks beneath soaring cathedral ceilings, her crown heavy with righteousness. The church bells ring not just with faith, but with conquest. The plague is not far behind. Europe is still scarred by the Black Death. Fields are empty in parts. Cities are crowded and filthy. Horses slip in streets slick with refuse. People light candles to saints, hoping for mercy, and yet, ambition burns brightly. Portugal sails south, past the bulge of Africa, trading trinkets for flesh. Enslaved Africans are already being transported north to Lisbon. Gold and ivory flow upward. Christianity follows closely behind, draped in banners and steel. In Spain, now unified, attention turns outward. The Ottoman Empire has closed overland trade routes to Asia. Spices cost fortunes. Silk is rarer than gold. And so, kings and queens look west. Not for the thrill of knowledge, but for the promise of empire. Maps are drawn with wide, blank spaces. Here be dragons, some say. But others wonder, what lies across that endless blue? They do not know of Tenochtitlan, or Cusco, or Cahokia. They do not imagine cities lit by stars and ruled by calendars older than their kings. To them, the world is still young, still theirs to find, still theirs to claim. And so, the stage is set. Two worlds, one, ancient and thriving, filled with people who live by the land, the stars, and the memory of ancestors. The other, restless and expanding, driven by faith, gold, and ships with red crosses on their sails. Neither truly knows the other exists, but the winds are beginning to shift. The sails are being raised, and soon, one world will collide with another, and only one will survive it unchanged. You find yourself now in a dim room lit by flickering candles. The maps on the walls are stitched with dreams. Curved lines trace imaginary coasts. Strange beasts are drawn at the edge of oceans. The scent of old parchment, beeswax, and iron ink fills the air. This is the world of Cristoforo Colombo, or as he now calls himself, Christopher Columbus. The wool weaver's son has become something else entirely, a man possessed by a vision, bordering obsession. He believes, truly, deeply, that Asia lies just a few weeks' sail to the west, that gold, silk, and spice await beyond the Atlantic like fruit on the other side of a veil. But the veil is thick, and Europe is slow to believe. Columbus begins by approaching the crown of Portugal. It is the late 1470s. Portugal, after all, has already sent ships far down the western coast of Africa. They have tasted empire, mapped unknown harbours, and carved routes to wealth by enslaving and trading. But when Columbus explains his plan to sail west instead of south, he is met with skepticism. The Portuguese court dismisses him. His calculations are flawed, they say. His distance estimates too short. He is passionate but not precise. And more than that, he is a foreigner. Still, he does not stop. He writes letters, revises maps, seeks allies. By now, he is no longer just a sailor. He is married into a minor Portuguese noble family. His wife has given him some standing and a son, Diego. But status in this age is slippery. Without royal backing, dreams remain paper-thin. So he turns to Spain. The kingdoms of Castile and Aragon are on the brink of something new. Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon have married, uniting much of Spain under one crown. And they are at war, a final push to drive out the Muslim Emirate of Granada from the Iberian Peninsula. To them, Columbus is both timely and tempting. He offers not just a trade route, but a path to wealth that could rival the Ottoman-controlled land routes to Asia. He promises souls to convert, lands to claim, and gold to fund wars, and the church. But for years, they delay. Meetings are held, reports are written, the court is cautious. Columbus waits. Imagine him walking the stone corridors of the Alhambra in Granada, its arches still echoing with Arabic poetry. As Christian banners are raised above its walls, he speaks with monks, nobles, anyone who will listen. His voice is careful but firm. He believes God has chosen him, that this is not just science, but destiny. His proposal is simple and bold. He wants 3 ships, a crew, and provisions for a long westward voyage. But he also demands something else, a title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, governorship of all lands discovered, and 1/10 of all riches found. It is an extraordinary ask for a man who has discovered nothing, yet ambition clings to him like a cloak. Eventually, the tides shift. In January 1492, the final Muslim stronghold of Granada falls. Spain is now Christian, united, and hungry. And suddenly, Columbus's timing is perfect. That same year in April, the capitulations of Santa Fe are signed. Ferdinand and Isabella grant Columbus the ships, the titles, and the hope of empire. 3 names will echo into history: Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. Their hulls are small, their decks creak, they are not built for comfort. Each is manned by sailors drawn from Andalusian ports, some seasoned, some criminal, most skeptical. Columbus, now about 41, prepares like a man racing toward fate. He writes letters, orders provisions, revises maps. He believes Asia lies just weeks away, that Chipangu, Japan, will rise from the sea golden and gleaming, but he is wrong, and yet in his error he will reshape the world. What was he truly seeking? Yes, spices. Yes, gold. But also, recognition. For all his ambition, Columbus still carried the mark of a commoner. His Genoese blood did not whisper noble lineage. He needed a kingdom, perhaps many, to validate him. He wanted to found colonies, govern provinces, leave a legacy that would dwarf his modest beginnings. But behind these desires was a darker thought: dominion. In his writings, Columbus speaks often of converting souls, of bringing the light of Christ to heathens. But beneath this piety is calculation. Conversion, for Columbus, was less about salvation and more about subjugation, a reason to claim, a reason to conquer. He did not dream of meeting equals on distant shores, he dreamt of owning them. And so, on a warm August morning in 1492, sails rise against the Spanish sky. The ships are stocked with wine, salted meats, hard biscuits, and barrels of water, chickpeas, lentils, dried fish. Religious icons hang above bunks. Rats scurry through the hold. The air smells of pitch and rope. Sailors kiss wives goodbye. The harbour fills with curious onlookers. Some whisper prayers, others shake their heads. The ships depart, gliding toward a horizon not yet marked on any map. And you drift with them, into a world where nothing will remain untouched. Now, the sails are full, the ropes are taut, the wind carries the scent of the coast, seaweed, sweat, and smoke, fading behind you as the harbour recedes. It is August 3rd, 1492. You are aboard a ship. You stand among 30 or so sailors, the deck beneath your feet slick with morning dew. The ship creaks in protest with each wave. Above you, gulls circle lazily, unaware that land will soon vanish for weeks. The Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria form a narrow triangle cutting into the Atlantic. The Santa Maria is the largest and slowest of the three, a deep, heavy cargo vessel, barely suited for exploration. Columbus makes her his flagship. Each vessel is cramped. Below deck is darkness. No separate quarters for most of the crew, just a single hold filled with barrels, sacks, and men packed close like grain. Sleep comes in shifts, on thin mats. The smell is already beginning to turn, of salted fish, of damp clothes, of nerves. But Columbus walks the deck like a man chosen. The journey begins quietly. The ship's first stop in the Canary Islands, part of the Spanish crown. Repairs are made, supplies are topped off, but tension brews. One ship's rudder keeps failing. Rumours swirl that the Pinta's owner is sabotaging the voyage. Still, by early September, the fleet leaves the last known shore. From here on, there is nothing but blue. Endless, consuming, quiet blue. The wind hums like a lullaby through the rigging. Sails billow gently and waves roll in steady rhythm. Day after day, the same horizon. No land, no birds, just ocean, infinite and unknowable. Imagine standing on that deck when you cannot swim. No one can. You don't know what lies beyond the skyline. The sun is punishing by day. The cold cuts deep at night. You dream of land, of trees, of bread. The rocking of the ship becomes your heartbeat. Columbus writes in his journal each evening. He records distances, but lies about them to his crew, understating how far they've travelled west. A trick to calm nerves, because fear is spreading. There are whispers below deck. Sailors mutter about turning back, some cry in sleep. Others gaze at the stars with hollow eyes. Weeks pass. No sign of Chipangu, no glimpse of land, not even floating seaweed. The ocean is becoming something else now. Not just a path, but a trap. But then, on the 16th of September, they spot Sargasso seaweed, long golden strands drifting past the hull. The men call out, "Could this mean land?" The mood lifts. They catch small birds circling the ship, but no coastline appears. Instead, the wind dies. Days of calm follow. The ships float on a glass-like sea. The silence is eerie, not peaceful but oppressive, Like the ocean is holding its breath, the sails hang limp. The crew grows restless again. You hear the arguments now in low voices. Columbus insists they press on. Others want to turn east. They say the maps are wrong. They say he'll get them all killed. But Columbus is unwavering. And then the wind returns. The ships move again. Day by day the signs grow stronger. Flying fish, fresh driftwood, birds flying west in flocks. Columbus promises land is near. October 10th, the breaking point. Some sailors, desperate and afraid, demand to turn back. There is talk of mutiny. Columbus negotiates. He says, if no land is found in 3 days, they will go home. That night, the moonlight dances on black waves, and then, on October 11th, around 10 p.m, a light is spotted, faint, flickering, like a candle bobbing in the distance. Some say they saw nothing, others swear it moved. At 2 a.m, the cry goes out, Tierra, land. The ships anchor in shallow water. Dawn creeps over the waves, and through the fog a shoreline appears, green, gentle, and unknown. The men fall to their knees. Some weep, others sing. Columbus writes in his log that they have reached the Indies, but this is no part of Asia. It is an island in the Bahamas known to its inhabitants as Guanahani. Soon Columbus will set foot upon it. But for now, the ships bob softly on the tide. The sailors sleep, exhausted. Dreams drift across the wooden decks, and the stars above are silent. You can almost hear the ocean breathing. In just a few hours, the first meeting will occur, not between equals, but between those who came with open hands and those who came with swords behind their backs. The morning sun breaks across the sea like molten gold. It warms your skin even before your eyes open. The sails above you shift gently in the breeze, and when you rise to look over the edge of the Santa Maria, you see it. Land. Low. Green. Silent. After more than 2 months at sea, the horizon is no longer empty. You see trees, thick and lush, stretching into the distance. The shoreline curves like a sleeping animal, untouched and mysterious. White sand glows against shallow turquoise waters. This is Guanahani. You don't know the name yet. Neither does Columbus. To him, it is simply landfall, a promised miracle. He dresses in fine robes, not for the island's people, but for his monarchs and God. He steps into the rowboat with the royal banner of Spain and the red cross of the Crusades fluttering behind him. The water is so clear. You can see the seafloor ripple beneath the oars. Columbus steps ashore. He falls to his knees, presses his lips to the ground, and raises the banner high. In his journal he will write of divine providence, of the glory of Spain, of the souls ripe for conversion. He does not ask who lives here. He does not ask what this place is called. He simply claims it. From the dense edge of the forest, eyes are watching. The Taíno people have lived on this land for centuries. Their world is one of balance. They farm cassava and sweet potatoes. They weave hammocks from cotton. They fish with bone-tipped spears. They worship gods of the sky and earth, of rain and fertility. They are strong, bronze-skinned, welcoming. They emerge slowly, curious, not fearful. They wear beads, feathers, and shells. Some paint their faces. They bring gifts, parrots, cotton thread, dried fruit. They laugh easily. Their language is soft, rhythmic, unfamiliar. Columbus writes in his journal, "They are very gentle, very generous. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things. They willingly traded everything they owned. They would make fine servants." You hear that, and the silence of the beach becomes heavier. To Columbus, their kindness is a weakness. Their simplicity is opportunity. He notes they have no iron, no steel, no horses. Their spears are tipped with fish teeth. They have gold earrings, small ones, but enough to make his eyes narrow with greed. And so, almost immediately, he begins to ask them, "Where is the gold?" The Taíno do not understand the hunger behind the question. They point toward the horizon, where another island lies, perhaps larger, perhaps richer. Columbus smiles. He does not see a community. He sees a resource, a gateway. He writes again in his journal, "With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." The words fall flat on parchment, but they ring loudly in time. The crew comes ashore in shifts. They marvel at the island's beauty. Flowers bloom in colours they have no names for. Hummingbirds dart through palm fronds. The sand is finer than any in Andalusia, but beneath the ore, the hunger simmers. They ask about spices, about pearls, about gold, always gold. They explore, following the Taíno into villages of circular huts with palm-thatched roofs. The homes are open air, clean, swept. There are children playing, elders weaving, dogs sleeping in the sun. No walls, no weapons, no suspicion. You imagine yourself walking among them, a stranger from another world whose presence will change everything, though they do not yet know it. Columbus leaves crosses in the ground at every site he visits, claims each island in the name of Spain. The names of the people, the rivers, the trees, are overwritten with Spanish ones, and still the Taíno smile. They don't know that these visitors have brought more than muskets and maps. They have brought disease, they have brought conquest, they have brought a belief that land cannot be shared, only owned. They have brought an empire. For now, the air is still gentle, the sun still warm, parrots still call from the canopy above. The moment feels soft, hopeful even. But history waits with a heavy foot. In a few days, Columbus will take some of the Taíno by force, kidnap them to learn Spanish, he says. He calls them gifts for the crown. He writes with pride that they offer no resistance. He is already building the foundations of something far darker. But tonight, on this quiet island, as the stars emerge over unfamiliar skies, the Taíno still dance in circles near their homes, and the ocean breathes, as if it knows what is coming. The breeze still carries the scent of sea salt and sugar cane. The Taíno continue to smile. They do not yet understand the new rules forming around them. Not the meaning of the red cross sewn onto strange woolen tunics. Not the way the visitors gesture toward their gold jewellery with narrow eyes. Not the sharpness of steel that glints brighter than any obsidian they've known. You walk among them now, barefoot, the warm earth soft beneath your soles. Their homes are open, ringed with trees. Chickens peck at the ground. Children chase each other between hammocks swaying in the breeze. And behind you, the Spaniards are building. They do not ask permission. They construct small wooden structures with heavy timbers hauled from the ship. They carve crosses into bark. They hammer fences into soil that has never known borders. Columbus names each place he lands, La Isla Española, now known as Hispaniola. Every village he sees, every bay he enters is renamed. The Taíno still offer gifts, and the Spaniards now offer something too, chains. At first it is subtle. Columbus takes 6 Taíno captives from Guanahani, for study, he says. He claims it is to learn the language, to build a bridge between cultures, but in his journal he notes that they show no resistance. They are timid, he writes, easily led. It would not take much to control them. By the time he reaches Hispaniola, the idea of domination is no longer theory, it is practice. The Spaniards begin demanding food, then labour, then tribute, and when they do not receive what they want, they take it. Imagine it. You are Taíno. You have given food, shown kindness, welcomed strangers into your home, and now they point to your daughter and gesture for her to follow. You don't understand the language, but you understand what they want. They have iron blades. Columbus and his men are no longer exploring. They are claiming. Hispaniola is lush, full of rivers, fertile fields, and, most importantly, gold. Small traces of it glint in the riverbeds. Columbus believes that with enough manpower he can extract it in great quantities. But the Spaniards are few. His solution is simple. Use the Taíno. He does not call it slavery. Not yet. He calls it service. But his actions make the meaning clear. Men are rounded up and forced to pan for gold. Others are made to haul wood, carry supplies, dig trenches. Columbus instructs that each person above the age of 14 must collect a hawk's bell of gold dust every 3 months. If they do, they receive a token to hang around their neck, a kind of pass. If they do not, there are consequences. The first punishment, amputation, a hand, sometimes both. The next, execution. It begins with 1 or 2, but word spreads like fire in dry grass. Soon the Taíno begin to flee. Some run deep into the forests, into the mountains. Others take their own lives rather than live in a world suddenly filled with violence. Columbus calls it necessary discipline. And the crown? The crown hears only that gold is coming. the Spaniards construct a fort on Hispanola, La Navidad, named for the day it was built. Columbus leaves behind a small garrison of men and prepares to return to Spain with tales of riches, strange lands, and captives. As the ships are loaded, a dozen Taíno are bound and brought aboard. Some are brought as servants, others as specimens. All are stripped from their families, their homes now marked with crosses and soaked in silence. As Columbus sails east, the island disappears behind him, but what remains is not memory, it is occupation. In his journal, Columbus writes, "They are very handsome people, very docile, and very quick to learn. They would make good servants. They are fit to be ruled." The handwriting is steady, the ink has not smudged, but between the lines, a transformation has taken place. A journey that began with sails and prayers now moves forward with shackles and whips. For the Taíno, time begins to change. The days are still warm, the rivers still run clear, but now soldiers patrol the footpaths. Crops are taken, children disappear, drums no longer echo through the hills. The smile that once greeted strangers is gone, and in its place, silence. Now leave the islands behind for a moment. Imagine marble halls, not palm trees. Imagine the hush of parchment and prayer, not parrots in the trees. You are standing in Rome, inside a chamber where words are written with more weight than swords. A single document is being drafted, one that will shape centuries. Its ink is still wet, its language Latin, but its meaning is conquest. This is the Doctrine of Discovery. Issued in 1493 by Pope Alexander VI, the doctrine is a papal bull, a decree from the highest voice of Christendom. It is called Inter Caetera, and it declares that any land not inhabited by Christians is open to be claimed by Christian rulers. Let that settle over you for a moment. Any land, no matter who lives there, no matter their history, their laws, their gods, if they are not baptized, they are not sovereign. They can be taken, they can be ruled, they can be used. In Spain, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand read the papal words with satisfaction. Columbus has returned from his first voyage, his ships heavy with trinkets, feathers, gold samples, and a few living captives. He has described lands ripe for Christianization. He has knelt before the throne and claimed to have discovered vast new territories. Never mind that people already live there. The church sees an opportunity, the Spanish crown sees an empire, and so the line is drawn. Literally. In the Treaty of Tordesillas, Spain and Portugal divide the unknown world between them. A vertical line is placed down the map, Spain to the west, Portugal to the east. Africa, Brazil, India, the Americas, all split by unseen hands in rooms far from the sunlit coast they now claim. The people living on those lands, they are not consulted, they are not mentioned. Their existence is acknowledged only as souls to be saved and resources to be harvested. This is how the world is renamed, not just on maps, but in minds. The doctrine gives religious justification to colonialism. It tells kings and queens, and explorers like Columbus, that their violence is not just allowed, but blessed. It gives a calm voice to cruelty, a sacred reason for slaughter. Missionaries follow soldiers, Bibles follow blades, churches are built where temples once stood, crosses are raised over shattered homes. Columbus, emboldened by this holy decree, returns to the Caribbean with 17 ships, thousands of men, horses, weapons, dogs trained for war. He now sees himself not as a visitor or explorer, but as a governor of souls. He has the Pope's blessing, the crown's support, and a doctrine that says the people he meets are not equal, they are potential property. In his writings, Columbus describes the Taíno not as citizens, but as part of the land. He notes their bodies, their labour potential, their lack of true faith. He talks of taming them, teaching them, training them to serve Spain and God. But what he truly does is strip them of identity. He sees not tribes, but servants, not families, but quotas, not villages, but mines. The doctrine has erased the moral question. Now there is only the task: claim, convert, control. And so, the Taíno are no longer just neighbours or hosts. They are part of a system, one that sees land as divinely empty, one that sees people as souls to be won, or bodies to be used. This doctrine will not end with Columbus. It will echo through centuries. In the conquest of the Aztec and Inca, in the transatlantic slave trade, in British colonies on 6 continents, in residential schools for indigenous children, in legal rulings centuries later still citing terra nullius, land belonging to no one. Because once a doctrine becomes law, it is hard to silence. But for now, you are still in the 1490s. The ships return, the swords are sharpened, the flags are planted, the doctrine has been written, but its consequences are just beginning to unfold. Back on Hispaniola, the first colonial government is taking shape, and the Taíno are beginning to understand this is not a visit, it is a permanent storm. The sails return, but this time they bring more than men. 17 ships now cut across the Atlantic, filled with over 1,200 colonists, soldiers, settlers, priests, craftsmen, and criminals. They carry horses, pigs, seeds for wheat and sugar cane, cannonballs, muskets, and letters of royal authority. This is no longer exploration. This is occupation. Columbus steps ashore once again, not as a guest but as a viceroy, a man now empowered to govern every inch of land in the name of the Spanish crown. You can feel it in the air. The drums have gone silent, the laughter has vanished, even the birds seem to sing less. The Taíno are beginning to understand. The newcomers are not leaving, and now they come not with open hands but with cold, metallic orders. The Spaniards begin building quickly. Forts, watchtowers, and roads. Forests are cleared, villages are dismantled, fields are carved out not for cassava or maize but for gold extraction and plantations, and they need labour. So the system begins. Each Taíno village is assigned to a Spaniard, under a practice that will later be called the Incomander. In theory, it is an agreement. The natives provide tribute, and the Spaniard provides protection and instruction in Christianity. In reality, it is forced labour under threat of death. You see men dragging heavy sacks of ore from riverbeds, women grinding corn not for their children but for Spanish tables, children used as messengers, as servants, as entertainment. And when a village cannot meet the quota of gold, which is often, they are punished. Not with a warning, not with a fine, but with violence. Columbus's orders are clear. Those who do not comply must be dealt with severely. And so, hands are cut off, not in secret, in public, held up as a warning. Taíno with stumps where fingers once curled are made to walk back to their villages, blood drying on their wrists. They are told to show others what happens to those who fail, and those who resist, those who flee to the mountains. The Spaniards chase them. They send dogs, war dogs, bred to maim and kill. They send patrols dragging back survivors in chains. They burn crops, salt the earth, torch homes. Entire communities vanish overnight, and yet the records of the Spanish crown show only columns of tribute collected. No mention of the smoke curling into the canopy, or the cries that echo through the ravines. The priest Bartolomé de las Casas, who would later become a critic of Spanish cruelty, witnessed these early years. He wrote, "What we committed in the Indies stands out among the most unjust, cruel and horrible crimes against mankind. But in 1493, those words have not yet been written. In this moment, you are surrounded by compliance through terror. Taíno chiefs are forced to kneel and swear loyalty. Entire populations are relocated. Cultural objects, masks, drums, carvings are burned. Paganism, the Spaniards call it. Evidence of the devil. And yet, they keep asking the same question. Where is the gold? Gold is not just wealth now, it is the reason. It is what Columbus must return to Spain with to justify this campaign. So, the quotas rise, the punishments escalate, and the bodies begin to pile. In one region of Hispaniola there is no gold at all. The villagers explain this again and again, but the Spaniards accuse them of hiding it. The punishment? They are rounded up and slaughtered. Survivors are branded, literally burned with hot irons like cattle. Some wear marks on their cheeks, others on their thighs. In every corner of the island the message becomes unmistakable. Submit, serve, or die. And in the background, like a slow-moving fog, comes disease, smallpox, influenza, measles. The Taíno have no immunity. They fall ill by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Fever, swelling, coughing. Entire villages are struck silent in a week. The Spaniards see it as fate. A divine purge, perhaps. They do not stop. They build over the bodies. Columbus, in his reports to Spain, downplays the violence. He speaks instead of progress, of success, of rich lands now loyal to the crown. He does not mention the sound of weeping from the mountains, or the silence in the abandoned huts, or the hands, just gold and glory. By the end of his second voyage, Columbus has transformed a once thriving island into a landscape of servitude. The Taíno are no longer seen as people. They are units of labour, obstacles to be removed, souls to be claimed or crushed. And the reign of terror, it has only just begun. Now imagine you're walking through the forested interior of Hispaniola. The path is soft with fallen leaves, but there are no drums, no children laughing, no birds calling through the canopy. Only the hush of leaves in windless air, and the creak of a tree that once shaded villages now burned to the ground. You pass fruit trees that still bear food, but no one comes to harvest. Hammocks hang from branches, empty. There are clay pots scattered near long cold hearths, and the silence that wraps around you is not peace. It is absence, the kind of silence that follows screaming. This is what remains of Taíno civilization. Before 1492, the island of Hispaniola was home to as many as 300,000 Taíno people. Some estimates say over 1 million across the Caribbean. By the early 1500s, in barely a decade, that number has plummeted. Some say half are gone by 1496. By 1508, it's less than 60,000. By 1518, perhaps 20,000 remain. By 1542, fewer than a few thousand. And not because of one single event, but from a relentless system. A system of work and whipping, of hunger and disease, of fear and dehumanization, of laws written in languages they didn't speak, under gods they didn't worship, enforced with swords they could not stop. Imagine what happened in slow motion. You are a Taíno child in 1493, 5 years old, watching strangers land with metal clothes and long sticks that thunder smoke. By 1495, you've seen your village chief executed for failing to provide tribute. By 1496, you and your mother are working under Spanish overseers, grinding corn not for celebration but survival. By 1498, your father is gone, lost to fever or punishment or both. By 1500, your mother collapses in the fields. She is not buried. There is no time. You're now 11 years old, and you are already old. Columbus, desperate to keep his promise of wealth, does something else. He authorizes mass captures of Taíno people to be shipped back to Spain, not as guests, not as converts, but as slaves. Chains replace gifts. Cargo holds replace hammocks. In 1495, 1,600 Taíno are rounded up, many of them children. Some are distributed among Columbus's men as rewards. The rest are marched to the coast. Nearly 500 are loaded onto ships bound for Seville. Of those, almost half die en route. The bodies are thrown into the sea. The survivors arrive in Europe as proof, not of culture, but of conquest. What was once a society filled with ritual, story, music, and kinship becomes a machine of extraction. The Spanish impose quotas. Bring us gold. Bring us food. Bring us your daughters. And if you can't, there are dogs. There are whips. There are gallows. Some Taíno try to resist. They run. They fight. But resistance is met with fire and iron. Whole regions are cleared. Villages flattened. Leaders captured and executed in public, made into warnings for others. One Taíno leader, Caonabo, is captured through deceit, gifted polished metal trinkets and shackles disguised as ornaments. When he realizes the betrayal, he says nothing. He knows what has begun cannot be undone. Another chief, Hatue, flees to Cuba. He warns other tribes. The Spaniards worship gold. They hunt us not for justice, but for treasure. To them we are animals, or worse. Later, when Hatue is captured and tied to a stake, a priest asks him if he will accept Christ so his soul may go to heaven. Hatue asks calmly, "Are Spaniards in heaven?" When the priest says yes, Hatue replies, "Then I would rather go to hell." And yet, even as the population vanishes before their eyes, the Spanish build more settlements, request more shipments, draw more maps. They do not stop. They do not mourn. They only expand. And in royal letters to Spain, Columbus continues to minimize. He praises the productivity of the islands, the submission of the natives, the promise of new lands. He describes a paradise of order and Christian mission. But the earth beneath his words is soaked with erasure, and the Taíno, once masters of the sea and sky, are now ghosts in their own land. So when you walk through the forest now, you don't see ruins, you see wounds. You feel them in the quiet, in the wind that no longer carries songs, in the rivers that no longer cradle carved canoes, in the stones that once circled fire, now cold forever. You listen. And all that answers is the hush of leaves, and the faint sound of a language nearly lost. As you leave the silent forest behind, imagine the creaking of ships once again. This time, the ships are not laden only with spices, gold dust and curiosities. They're also heavy with living cargo. People shackled below decks, their faces pale from fear and sickness. This is the beginning of a new chapter, the birth of the transatlantic slave trade. Columbus's voyages opened more than new routes to unknown lands. They opened a horrifying door, one through which millions of indigenous peoples and later Africans would be torn from their homes and forced into slavery. The early shipments are small by later standards, but they are deadly precedents. Remember the Taíno captives, the first human cargo shipped across the Atlantic to Spain, men, women and children chained in dark holds, tightly packed and deprived of air. Many did not survive the journey. They were sold as slaves in Spanish markets. Some were displayed like trophies, others were forced to work in the houses of nobles or labour in coastal sugar plantations. This system was brutal and efficient. It treated human beings as property, mere units of wealth. Individuals became cargo, assigned value by skin colour and origin. The consequences ripple outward. As the indigenous populations on Caribbean islands collapse, demand for labour grows. The Taíno are no longer enough, either because they have died or because the system demands more. The Spanish turn to Africa. At first, traders bring a few African slaves to the Caribbean. Their arrival marks the beginning of a trade network that will stretch across oceans, continents, and centuries. It will expand with terrifying speed. The horrors will multiply. Millions will be uprooted, families torn apart, cultures fragmented, all to feed the hunger of empires. Back on Hispanola, the Incomander system is reinforced by laws that legitimize enslavement. Taíno and African slaves are forced to work in mines extracting gold. They toil in sugarcane fields that stretch like green seas, cut with machetes and burned with fire. Their days are measured in sweat and pain. Any resistance is crushed swiftly. In this brutal world, human life is reduced to a ledger entry, to numbers of slaves bought, sold, or lost, to the pounds of gold extracted, to profits tallied in distant palaces. And Columbus? Though not the architect of this vast system, he was a crucial catalyst. By shipping indigenous captives to Spain, by imposing forced labour regimes, and by opening the door to African slavery, his voyages set in motion one of history's darkest enterprises. Yet, in Letters to the Crown, he frames it all as progress. He writes of civilizing missions, of spreading Christianity, of enriching Spain. The cost, the lives lost, the families broken, the cultures erased, is left unspoken. Think for a moment about those first ships crossing the Atlantic with living cargo. The vast ocean, once a symbol of freedom and discovery, became a prison. Chains clinked beneath decks. Whispers of despair rose in the humid air. Faces blurred by darkness. Dreams drowned in salt water. This was the new reality. And it would continue, on a scale never before seen. So, when you look at the history of Columbus and his voyages, remember this. Not just land discovered, not just new worlds encountered, but a world reshaped through exploitation, enslavement, and suffering. And the echoes of this system are still felt today. Imagine the dense forests and rolling hills of Hispanola, once alive with the rhythms of Taíno life, the steady beating of drums, the laughter of children, the rustle of woven hammocks in the breeze. Now, those sounds are drowned beneath the relentless clang of metal and the sharp cries of despair. The gold fever has taken hold. Columbus and his men demand ever-increasing amounts of gold from the native population. The Spaniards devise a brutal system to extract the precious metal, one that is impossible for the Taíno to meet but must be obeyed nonetheless. Each person is assigned a quota, a small glittering bell-shaped measure of gold dust collected from riverbeds and streams. It seems like a faint hope, a glimmer of light, but failure to meet the quota means harsh punishment. Imagine yourself as a Taíno villager, waking each morning with the weight of impossible expectations pressing on your shoulders. You search the rivers for gold flakes, your fingers cold and numb from hours spent in the water. Your body aches. The sun burns your back. The sound of distant axes cuts through the air as forests are felled to expand the mining sites. If you return with less gold than demanded, your hand, your very hand, is taken as a warning to others. This punishment is not whispered about in secret. It is public, deliberate, a message hammered into flesh and bone. Hands are severed, fingers lost. Blood seeps into the soil, mingling with the dust. The cries that follow are muffled, swallowed by the thick forest and the silence of those too afraid to speak. Villages are destroyed when quotas are not met. Homes are burned, fields are trampled, crops left to wither, the sound of axes replacing the rhythm of drums, fathers and mothers dragged away, children left alone. The Taíno are stripped of their dignity, their freedom, their future. You see the faces of those who survive, hollow-eyed, gaunt, their spirits broken. Columbus's men document their cruelty with chilling pride. They write of trading young girls for European goods, of beating those who resist, of celebrating their dominance with no remorse. The island, once vibrant and full of life, becomes a land of shadows. The forests that sheltered generations now echo with footsteps of soldiers and slaves. The rivers, once clear, run thick with sediment from relentless mining. The earth itself seems to weep. Yet despite the suffering, the gold never seems enough. Columbus sends word to Spain, boasting of riches and conquest. But behind the words lies a stark truth. The system is failing. The population is collapsing. The land is depleted. And still the demand grows. Imagine for a moment the quiet moments in the night. The exhausted Taíno, tending wounds, comforting children, whispering prayers to forgotten gods. The Spaniards, counting gold, sharpening blades, planning the next raid. Two worlds locked in a terrible dance. And as the moon rises over Hispaniola, the island breathes, heavy with pain and loss. Now, imagine the island after dusk. The sky darkens, stars emerge faintly through thin clouds, and the usual chorus of night creatures is subdued. A heavy silence blankets the villages, empty of the joyful noise that once filled the air. But beneath this silence lies a shadowed reality, one even grimmer than the brutal demands for gold and labour. The most vulnerable, the women and children, bear scars that reach far beyond flesh. Picture yourself in a small Taíno village. The day has ended, but the hard work is not over. Young girls, some as young as 9 or 10, are taken from their homes. They are traded, not as daughters or sisters, but as property. They become the spoils of conquest. These children are sent to serve in the homes of Spaniards or worse, forced into roles where their freedom is stolen and their innocence shattered. The concept of childhood, as understood by their people, is erased under foreign hands. Women too face unimaginable cruelty. They are forced into servitude, labouring in fields or kitchens, but also subject to exploitation beyond measure. Columbus's men write with disturbing frankness about the sexual abuse inflicted on Indigenous women. The island becomes a place where violence follows not just the sword, but also the shadows of desire twisted by power. Mothers are separated from their children. Sisters disappear without a trace. Families are fractured. The psychological weight of this cruelty echoes through generations. The Taíno oral traditions speak of loss, not only of lives, but of trust, hope, and safety. The children who survive grow up in a world stripped of protection, where fear becomes a constant companion. Imagine the texture of a mother's hand trembling as she shields her child from the cold night air, her eyes weary but alert, always listening for footsteps. The rhythm of life, once steady and communal, is shattered. In the settlements, the colonizers treat these horrors as mundane facts. In their journals, they boast of conquests and control, of rewards won and punishments administered. They describe women and children as commodities. The humanity of the Taíno is erased, replaced by a ledger of slaves, gold, and land. Yet, amidst the darkness, there are whispered stories of resistance and resilience. Women who smuggle food to the hidden families in the forests. Children who learn the old songs in secret, keeping their language alive, and the quiet strength of those who refuse to surrender their spirit, even when their world falls apart. The fall of women and children marks a deep wound, not just on the body of Hispanola, but on the soul of its people. It is a wound whose echoes still ripple through time. As you let this truth settle, imagine the nights quiet, heavy with grief, yet holding space for the resilience that refuses to be extinguished. Now, after the long nights of suffering and loss, imagine faint sounds beginning to stir in the distance. Quiet, almost inaudible. Like the rustle of leaves before a coming storm, these are the whispers of rebellion. The Taíno, though battered and diminished, are not broken. Despite brutal punishments and relentless pressure, small groups retreat deeper into the island's mountains and forests. Here, they nurture hope, share stories, and plan in secret. Resistance takes many forms. Sometimes it is a silent refusal to work. Sometimes it is a sabotage. Tools broken, fires set, paths hidden. Sometimes it is armed conflict, though with few weapons against the Spaniards' steel and firearms. Imagine a night where a group of Taíno warriors gather beneath a canopy of stars. They speak in hushed tones, their eyes sharp, their spirits fierce. They know the cost of rebellion, capture, mutilation, death. But they also know the cost of submission. In this twilight between fear and hope, courage blooms. Meanwhile, among Columbus's own men, doubts begin to grow. Not all Spaniards are hardened conquerors. Some observe the cruelty and question its justice. Reports start to trickle back to Spain. Letters and testimonies describe atrocities, mutilations, forced labour, starvation, and murder. Bartolomé de las Casas, once a soldier turned priest, becomes a vocal critic. He writes letters pleading for reform, urging the crown to protect the indigenous peoples from abuse. His words stir debate in royal courts and churches, yet gold still flows. Profit silences many voices. The crown faces a painful dilemma, the promise of wealth versus the reports of cruelty. For a time, greed wins. Columbus's authority remains. The brutality continues. Despite growing unrest, the machinery of conquest grinds on. Villages are raided, families are torn apart, but seeds of change have been planted. The whispers of rebellion will grow louder. The questions of conscience will not be silenced. As you listen to these quiet stirrings, let your mind drift with the wind through the Caribbean forests. Feel the tension between despair and hope, and know that even in the darkest moments the human spirit can resist. Imagine the bustling streets of Seville and the quiet corridors of power in the Spanish court. Here, far from the distant shores of the Caribbean, a different drama unfolds. A drama of authority, rivalry, and justice. Christopher Columbus, once celebrated as the great navigator and discoverer, now finds himself at the centre of controversy. His second and third voyages to the Americas have brought gold, land, and captives, but also reports of mismanagement and cruelty. Colonists and officials accuse him of harsh rule, corruption, and failure to maintain order. The Crown, eager to assert control and stabilise the colony, decides to act. In 1500, Francisco de Bobadilla arrives in Hispaniola, appointed as royal commissioner with full powers to investigate. Bobadilla finds a colony in chaos. He sees towns suffering under violence and fear. He hears tales of torture, rebellion, and discontent. But his focus is on Columbus's governance. In a swift and decisive move, Bobadilla arrests Columbus and his brothers. They are shackled and sent back to Spain in chains, not for genocide or cruelty, but for mismanagement, abuse of power, and harsh treatment of colonists. Imagine Columbus on that journey home, chained, humiliated, yet unbowed. He writes to the crown, defending his actions as necessary for order and conquest. He insists that his vision remains true, that he has opened new worlds for Spain. But the damage is done. His titles are stripped, his authority revoked. He will never govern in the Americas again. Yet, even as Columbus falls from grace, the cruel system he helped create continues unchecked. The suffering of the indigenous peoples is not part of his trial. His removal is about politics, not justice. The crown tolerates the ongoing violence so long as the gold flows. Columbus's personal downfall is not a reckoning for the lives destroyed. It is a moment of shifting power. Back in Spain, Columbus spends his final years petitioning to regain his privileges. He clings to the belief that he has fulfilled his mission, but he never fully comprehends the scale of devastation his voyages have unleashed. The chains that bind him are visible. The chains that bind millions, far more so, are invisible yet unbreakable. As you reflect on this fall from power, let your thoughts drift gently. Consider how justice is often tangled with politics, how history remembers heroes and forgets victims, and how the tides of fortune can turn while the echoes of pain remain. Now picture a quiet room bathed in dim candlelight, the air heavy with the scent of fading parchment and cold stone walls. Christopher Columbus lies ill, far from the lands he crossed, surrounded not by the glory he once sought, but by fading memories and unfulfilled dreams. It is the year 1506. Columbus is 54 years old. His body is weary, his spirit worn, but his mind remains fixed on a single, unyielding belief that he has reached the edges of Asia, the Indies, as he called them. He does not know that the lands he claimed are in fact vast continents unknown to Europeans. He does not know the full scope of the destruction left in his wake. In his final days, Columbus reflects on his voyages. He writes letters filled with hope and frustration, asking for restoration of his titles, lands, and privileges. He clings to the idea of discovery, convinced he is a pioneer bringing light to unknown darkness. But the truth is far darker. Behind the celebrations of his journeys lies a legacy of conquest, enslavement, and genocide. The Taíno population has been decimated, indigenous cultures have been shattered, empires built on blood and gold have begun to rise. Columbus dies still unaware of the immense human cost of his actions. He never witnesses the full extent of the transatlantic slave trade, the spread of disease, or the waves of colonization his voyages unleashed. His dreams are those of a man who sought glory and riches, but the world remembers him both as a hero and as a harbinger of suffering. Imagine the silence that follows his passing. No grand ceremonies, no monuments built in his honor, yet only the turning of pages in history books yet to be written. As you lay your head down tonight, let this moment remind you that history is complex, that the heroes we celebrate often carry shadows within their stories, and that understanding these truths, however uncomfortable, brings us closer to a more honest world. Now imagine standing on the shores of a vast new world, an expanse of forests, mountains, rivers, and plains, teeming with life and home to countless indigenous peoples. This world, once untouched by European empires, is about to be swept by a tidal wave of conquest. Columbus's voyages were not isolated events. They were the first ripples in a tsunami that would reshape the Americas forever. After Columbus, others followed. Hernán Cortés sailed to Mexico, conquering the mighty Aztec Empire with a small band of soldiers and alliances with rival indigenous groups. Francisco Pizarro journeyed to Peru, toppling the Inca Empire with brutal efficiency. These conquistadors, fueled by the lust for gold and glory, spread destruction across continents. Cities burned, temples razed, libraries and knowledge lost. Imagine the great civilizations of the Americas: Teotihuacan, Tenochtitlan, Cusco, Cahokia, reduced to ruins, their people slaughtered or enslaved, their cultures fragmented, their languages silenced. Entire ways of life disappeared under the weight of European colonization. And behind these conquests was the same logic Columbus's voyages set in motion. Claim land for the crown, extract wealth, convert souls, subjugate peoples, empires expanded, boundaries redrawn. The Americas became a mosaic of colonies: Spanish, Portuguese, English, French, and Dutch, each imposing their rule. The demographic consequences were staggering. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza ravaged indigenous populations who had no immunity. Estimates suggest that in the century after first contact, up to 90% of the indigenous population perished. The landscape itself changed, fields replaced by plantations, forests cleared for sugar, tobacco, and cotton. This legacy of empire is also one of resilience and survival. Despite centuries of oppression, indigenous peoples preserved languages, customs, and stories. They resisted through rebellion, negotiation, and adaptation. Today, Their descendants continue to honour this heritage and fight for recognition and rights. As you imagine these vast and painful changes, think of the world Columbus helped usher in. A world of brutal conquest and enduring cultures. A world shaped by loss and hope. The soil beneath your feet carries this history, layered with stories of empire and death, but also survival. Now imagine sitting in a quiet classroom, a book open in your hands, pages yellowed with age. The story inside is familiar. Christopher Columbus, the brave explorer who discovered America. A hero painted in bright colours, sailing boldly into the unknown, bringing civilization and progress. But beneath this polished tale lies a far different truth, one that was erased, rewritten, or hidden for centuries. From the earliest textbooks to modern celebrations, the story of Columbus has often been told as a tale of adventure and triumph. His voyages are framed as noble quests, discovering new lands, expanding Christian faith, and opening the door to a better world. The darker realities, the genocide of the Taíno, the transatlantic slave trade, the brutal conquest, are often omitted or glossed over. Imagine the classroom where you learned this story, the flags waving on Columbus Day parades, songs and poems praising his courage. Yet the voices of the indigenous peoples, their suffering, resilience and perspective, were largely absent. The textbooks rarely mentioned the millions who died or were enslaved. The brutal systems of colonialism were sanitized. This myth-making served political and social purposes. It justified conquest and colonization. It bolstered national pride. It obscured uncomfortable truths, and it shaped generations' understanding of history. But history is not fixed. It is a living conversation. Modern scholars, Indigenous activists and communities have worked tirelessly to challenge these myths. They bring forward the stories of the forgotten and the silenced. They reveal the full impact of Columbus's voyages, not just discovery, but devastation. Imagine now a classroom where these truths are told, where history is complex, nuanced, and inclusive, where the story of Columbus is not a simple celebration but a starting point for reflection, where students learn to question, to understand, and to empathize. This shift is a step toward healing, a way to honor those who suffered, a way to build a future rooted in truth. Now imagine standing quietly in an ancient forest or beside a river whose waters have flowed unchanged for centuries. Beneath your feet lie the bones of countless ancestors, Taíno, Maya, Aztec, Inca, and many others, whose stories have been buried by time and conquest but are now beginning to speak again. These voices come not from textbooks or monuments, but from the land itself, from historians, archaeologists, and indigenous communities reclaiming their past. Across the Americas, modern researchers uncover artifacts, ruins, and records long forgotten or ignored. They piece together the lives of those who lived before and during Columbus's arrival, revealing rich civilizations filled with art, science, and complex societies. Through oral histories, Indigenous elders pass down traditions, stories, and knowledge that survive despite centuries of attempts to erase them. These voices remind us that the Americas were not empty lands waiting to be discovered, but vibrant worlds filled with people who loved, lived, and dreamed. Imagine sitting around a fire with an Indigenous elder, hearing stories of resilience, how their ancestors endured despite overwhelming odds. They speak of ceremonies, songs, and customs that connect past and present. They speak of loss, but also of hope. These voices challenge the silence imposed by history. They call for recognition, justice, and respect. They remind us that history is not just about the past. It shapes identity, culture, and the future. As you listen, feel the weight of these stories and the strength they carry. The bones beneath us are not just remnants of tragedy. They are foundations of survival, and they whisper a message of endurance, a promise that memory cannot be erased. Picture a quiet city square, sunlight filtering through trees as a statue stands tall, once a symbol of pride, now a figure under scrutiny. Slowly, voices gather, not in celebration, but in demand for truth and reckoning. In recent years, statues of Christopher Columbus have become focal points of protest and reflection. These monuments, erected to honor conquest and discovery, face growing calls to come down. Imagine crowds assembling, holding signs and sharing stories. They do not topple statues out of hatred or erasure, but from a desire for healing, a desire to acknowledge the pain hidden behind marble and bronze, to lift up the voices long silenced by history's narrative. These movements are part of a broader awakening, a global effort to confront colonial legacies honestly. Communities advocate for renaming schools, holidays, and public spaces once dedicated to figures like Columbus. They call for education that includes Indigenous perspectives, truth-telling, and cultural respect. Statues fall, but stories rise. New memorials honour the resilience and survival of Indigenous peoples. Museums and cultural centres work alongside native communities to share history with honesty and depth. Art and literature flourish, reclaiming identity and memory. This transformation is slow and often painful, but it offers hope, a chance to rewrite history not with erasure but with inclusion, to build bridges between past and present, and to imagine futures where truth guides understanding. As you reflect on this change, imagine the statue's shadow shrinking beneath a new dawn. A dawn where stories are not only told but heard, where pain and pride coexist, and where the healing of history begins. As the last embers of night fade, imagine standing at the threshold of dawn. The story of Columbus is not simply history. It is a night that stretches far beyond his lifetime, casting long shadows over continents and cultures. This night is marked by pain, loss, and injustice, but also by resilience, memory, and the slow awakening toward truth. Think of the lands Columbus discovered, already shining with rich life, culture, and spirit. That light was not extinguished, though it was clouded by centuries of conquest. The suffering unleashed has never fully ended. Generations have faced oppression, displacement, and erasure. But the night is not endless. Today, voices rise. Indigenous peoples reclaim their histories and cultures. Communities demand justice, recognition, and healing. Histories once silenced are now spoken aloud. The earth itself remembers. Rivers whisper names, forests hold stories, and beneath the soil lie bones that speak truths. This moment is the first step toward mourning, toward a world that can hold both grief and hope, that can learn from its darkest chapters to build a better future. So as you drift towards sleep, let the knowledge settle gently. Remember the complexities of history, the heroes and the horrors. Hold space for those lost, and imagine the dawn that follows the longest night, a dawn where truth shines bright. Thank you for listening to this journey through a past often hidden from view. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, where and when you're watching from. May your dreams be peaceful and your mornings bright.